It's one of the greatest transformations in human history. In just 30 years, China lifted over 800 million people out of poverty and became the world's second largest economy. It looks like a miracle, but it wasn't luck. And it wasn't capitalism as we know it. This was a machine, carefully designed, engineered by a one-party state with total control over money, land, and power. In this video, we'll break down how that machine actually works, who really holds power, what drives growth, and whether this model can survive the pressure from crashing debt, rising tariffs, and a shifting global economy. Additionally, we'll not only break down how China's economy actually works, but also identify key trends, risks, and opportunities that smart investors can track, anticipate, and potentially profit from. From the outside, China looks like an unstoppable machine, a nation of megacities, bullet trains, robot factories, churning out the world's electronics, EVs, and solar panels. To some, it's a model of efficient authoritarian capitalism, a government that gets things done, without gridlock, without chaos. To others, it's a threat, a state-run behemoth playing by its own rules, exporting more than goods, influence, surveillance tech, and political pressure. But most people don't understand what really made this rise possible. It wasn't just cheap labor and foreign factories. It was something deeper, evolved communism system of government control and finance that fueled explosive growth. And here's the thing, very few outsiders understand how that system actually works. Who calls the shots? Who gets rich? And what happens when the machine starts to crack? Here's a trick question. Who runs China? Most people would say Xi Jinping and stop there. Maybe they've heard of the Communist Party, but almost no one ever talks about the government. That's because China's real constitutional government, the State Council, is almost invisible to the outside world. And that's not an accident. Xi Jinping dominates every headline. But technically, it's Premier Li Qiang who heads the government, managing the cabinet, ministries, and daily operations. His team includes vice premiers and state councillors, like deputy prime ministers. It looks like a normal government, but here's the twist. It doesn't make policy. It follows party orders. So if you've never heard of Li Qiang or the State Council, you're not alone. That's how power works in China. Centralized, quiet, and carefully choreographed. Let's break down how that system is structured and how real power flows from the top down. At the top sits Xi Jinping, holding three roles: General Secretary of the Party, State President, and Commander of the Military. The presidency is mostly ceremonial. Real power comes from the party. Below him is the Politburo Standing Committee. 7 men who decide everything from economic strategy to internal crackdowns. This is China's true executive circle. The Secretariat manages day-to-day party affairs, ensuring the top leaders' directives are followed down the chain. It keeps the bureaucracy running in sync. Then comes the Politburo, 24 members who manage party work across the country. Propaganda, finance, state firms, cybersecurity. Beneath that is the Central Committee, around 200 full members and 170 alternates. They approve big picture decisions and elect the top leadership. But behind the scenes, the party's most feared tool is the Central Commission for Discipline Inspection, or CCDI. Think of it as the party's internal police. Their job: enforce loyalty, investigate corruption, silence dissent. This is how Xi consolidated power, not just by promotion, but by purging hundreds of rivals through the CDI. Now, how does the system actually function? New policies, crackdowns, economic plans, how are they made? Despite the massive structure, real decisions are made by a small group, frequently. The Standing Committee meets weekly. The Politburo meets monthly. Big laws are often announced as party directives and passed down to ministries for execution. The National Party Congress, with 2,300 delegates, meets only once every 5 years, but by then, all real decisions have already been made. It's more like a national ritual, not a debate. So how do the party and state interact? Simple. The party commands and the state implements. Ministries don't create policy, they receive it. The Premier doesn't debate Xi, he follows instructions. And this is what makes China so different. One invisible structure, the party, runs everything. Business, media, courts, even the military. The government is just the front office. In the US, the Federal Reserve is independent. In China, the central bank is not. The People's Bank of China, or PBOC, sets monetary policy, but it doesn't answer to markets. It answers to the party. It controls interest rates, bank liquidity, foreign exchange reserves, and the digital yuan. But unlike Western systems, China uses two different interest rates. The first is the Medium-Term Lending Facility, or MLF. That's what the PBOC charges commercial banks for short-term funding. It acts like China's base rate. The second is the Loan Prime Rate, or LPR. That's the rate banks use to lend money to businesses and home buyers. Mortgages are tied to the 5-year LPR, while most corporate loans use the 1-year LPR. The PBOC adjusts the medium-term lending facility, and banks follow by adjusting the loan prime rate. But none of this is market-driven. Rate cuts or hikes happen only when the party gives signal, and this power isn't limited to interest rates. In 2018, when Trump hit China with tariffs, the yuan suddenly weakened by almost the exact percentage of the tariffs. It wasn't organic, it was engineered. The PBOC used state-owned banks to buy dollars and sell yuan, weakening the currency to protect exporters. It also changed the daily midpoint rate, the official level set every morning, to guide markets lower. In China, currency isn't just a market, it's a message. Even the digital yuan, the e-CNY, is about more than tech. It's programmable, trackable, and gives the party full visibility into how money moves. The PBOC may look like a central bank, but it acts like a political department. Its role isn't stability, it's obedience.
If you're watching this, you already care about patterns. I use the TradingView charting platform to turn those patterns into trades. Dark and light theme, clean charts, fast watch lists, powerful screeners, economic calendar, the best phone charting app with alerts to my pocket, and all indicators I actually need. It covers all the markets I track: stocks, crypto, FX, and commodities, so it works for any type of investor. And it supports 20 languages. Sign up for a free account through my link in the description. It supports the channel at no extra cost to you, and you'll get a $15 reward if you decide to buy a subscription via our referral link. Look first, then leap.
China's economy runs on two very different types of companies. First, state-owned enterprises, or SOEs. These are massive firms owned and controlled by the state. They dominate energy, banking, telecoms, and defense. These companies don't exist to maximize profits. They exist to fulfill political objectives, build pipelines, expand surveillance, bail out regions, lose money if needed. Many are bloated and inefficient, but they're protected by the system and backed by nearly unlimited state support. Then there are the private companies, the engine behind China's tech, retail and export boom. Firms like Alibaba, ByteDance, and BYD. They operate for profit, but they are never truly independent. Chinese law requires all large private firms to host internal Communist Party cells, embedded directly in management. And when the party wants to send a message, these firms are punished. Just ask Jack Ma, who vanished after criticizing regulators. His IPO was cancelled. Billions evaporated. All companies pay corporate income tax, usually 25%. That money is collected by the Central Tax Authority, but split between Beijing and local governments. Local governments rely heavily on this revenue, especially from VAT, land use taxes and real estate fees. But SOEs do something more. They also pay dividends to the state. These go to a special body called State-Owned Asset Supervision and Administration Commission. SOEs acts like a super shareholder, collecting profits and reinvesting them in national priorities. It's not about return, it's about control. So in simple terms, private firms pay taxes to keep operating. State-owned enterprises pay taxes plus dividends to fund the party's ambitions. This is not capitalism, it's a controlled ecosystem with two sets of players feeding one master system. China's economic rise was built with purpose, with coordination, and with a plan. And that plan ran on three core engines: exports, real estate, and infrastructure. For decades, these three forces pushed China's GDP into the stratosphere. Let's start with the first and most powerful engine: exports. China became the world's factory. Electronics, furniture, clothing, machinery. If you bought it in the 2000s, chances are it was made in China. This export boom wasn't accidental. In the 1990s, China opened up coastal cities as special manufacturing zones. It offered cheap labor, tax breaks, and streamlined logistics. Global corporations rushed in: Nike, Apple, GM, Siemens, setting up factories to supply the world. And in return, China generated massive trade surpluses. For years, this foreign demand was the main fuel of China's miracle. Every dollar spent abroad created jobs, built factories, and boosted growth at home. But as we'll see, relying on the world made China rich, but also made it vulnerable. The second engine of China's rise wasn't built in factories, and it was built in concrete. Real estate became China's biggest driver of investment, jobs, and local revenue. But it didn't start with a housing boom. It started with a financing problem. In China, local governments weren't allowed to borrow money directly. They had massive responsibilities: roads, schools, hospitals, but no debt tools. So they found a workaround: sell land use rights to property developers. Not the land itself, just the right to build on it for 70 years. These land sales became a major source of income. The more they sold, the more money they had to fund growth. Developers, in turn, took that land and pre-sold apartments before they were built. That cash-funded construction, creating a loop of demand, jobs, and GDP growth. For over a decade, this model worked. Cities grew, middle-class families poured savings into new homes, developers boomed. But this wasn't just a housing market, it was a fiscal machine. Local governments depended on rising land prices to stay solvent, which is why, when property prices fall, the entire system starts to shake. The third engine of China's rise is infrastructure: roads, metro systems, stadiums, bridges, ports. But what powered that construction wasn't just concrete, it was debt. Just like with real estate, local governments couldn't borrow money directly, so they created a workaround: LGFVs, or local government financing vehicles. These LGFVs acted like private firms, but were state-controlled. They borrowed money, usually from state-owned banks, using land as collateral. Then they used that cash to build. This model built modern China: roads, metro lines, tunnels, airports. It added to GDP. It created jobs. But here's the catch. Many of these projects weren't meant to be profitable, at least not right away. Some were built with grand visions of future growth. The idea was, if you build it now, the people and businesses will come later. Others were built as basic needs, whereas not investments, like public housing or transportation for poor regions. Useful, yes. Profitable? Not always. Over time, these projects piled up, but the returns didn't. LGFVs kept borrowing. The land values stayed inflated, but real revenue often flat. And here's the problem, the debt is now massive. Over $9 trillion, much of it off the books, hidden through local financing webs. No one knows the exact number, because LGFVs don't report like real companies. There's no national audit, just estimates. These projects gave China the appearance of unstoppable growth, but many still run far below capacity. The return on investment is delayed, the debt very real. These three engines, exports, real estate and infrastructure, pushed China's GDP into the stratosphere. But now, each one is showing cracks. And if all three stall at the same time, the entire machine could break. China's growth machine was designed to build, and build fast. But now, the same system is hitting its limits. And we hear for the past few years that China has big real estate and economy problems. But what kind of problems? Look at this chart. We can see that total value output of construction industry is in uptrend and growth consistently. So what is the problem? The model relied on constant expansion. More factories, more apartments, more roads. But what happens when demand stops growing? Now, look at this graph that shows sales of new homes. It's in a decline. It means fewer and fewer people buy new homes. What can be the reason behind this? China is shifting from manufacturing to services and more high-value, more technological production, from manual labor to automation. That means fewer jobs and fewer workers needing new homes. On top of that, China is aging. For decades, the one-child policy limited population growth. Now, the country is shrinking, and fewer young people means less demand for homes. The result? Slowing income, weak confidence, and a housing market that once looked bulletproof, now cracking wide open. We're already seeing the fallout. Evergrande, once China's biggest developer, defaulted on $300 billion in debt. Country Gardens soon followed. Millions of home buyers stopped paying mortgages on unfinished homes. The result? Mortgage boycotts, frozen credit, collapsing trust. And behind it all, ghost cities, massive blocks of empty apartments, and collapsing land sales, once the main revenue source for local governments. But the most dangerous part is hidden. Over $9 trillion in LGFV debt, built up through years of shadow borrowing by local governments. These loans were secured not by revenue, but by land. When prices were rising, it looked safe. Now that land sales have collapsed, the collateral is worth far less, or nothing. Banks, bondholders, and local lenders are now holding paper backed by land no one wants to buy, and projects that produce no cash flow. The result? A silent financial crisis. Local governments can't repay the debt, banks can't recover their collateral, and the entire system is too entangled to unwind cleanly. For 20 years, China grew by building, but now the model is breaking under its own weight, and the future looks uncertain. China's rise was powered by exports. It became the world's factory, assembling everything from smartphones to wind turbines. But now, that engine is entering a new phase. So, what exactly does China export? The top categories are electronics, industrial machinery and nuclear reactors, furniture and lighting, vehicles, especially EVs, and toys and sporting goods. Together, they make up the bulk of China's outbound trade. These products have kept ports moving, cities growing, and foreign reserves flowing for over 2 decades. Where does it all go? China's top customers are the United States, the European Union, and the ASEAN countries. Together, they account for over 45% of China's exports. Even in 2020, when the world locked down, China's exports held steady. It was the only major economy still shipping at scale. Then, in 2021 came the boom. A post-COVID global buying spree pushed China's exports past $3.3 trillion, the highest in its history. But since then, growth has stalled. Exports to the US and EU stalled due to tariffs and import restrictions. ASEAN remains stable, but can't fully offset the losses. Now, imagine if your biggest customer hit you with 50% tariffs. That's not a slowdown, that's a threat. China's export engine isn't collapsing, but it's no longer accelerating. And in a model designed for non-stop growth, that's a warning sign. China didn't just benefit from global trade, it dominated it. But that dominance came with consequences. In July 2018, President Trump launched the first wave of 10% tariffs, hitting $34 billion worth of Chinese goods. The targets: industrial machinery, auto parts, aerospace components, semiconductors. China hit back, targeting US soybeans, pork, and autos. The trade war had begun. Over the next 18 months, the US expanded tariffs to over $360 billion of Chinese imports. Now, everything from electronics and plastics to furniture, clothing, and shoes was being taxed. China countered these tariffs by devaluation of CNY, which helps to minimize USA tariffs almost completely. By the end of Trump's presidency, the trade war had gone from industrial policy to kitchen tables, hitting everyday goods. And here's the twist: most of those tariffs are still in place. President Biden didn't remove them. Europe is now joining in. In 2023, the EU launched anti-subsidy probes into Chinese electric vehicles and solar panels, accusing them of flooding the market with state-backed overcapacity. And nowadays, during Trump presidency 2.0, new wave of tariffs came that settled around 55%. Meanwhile, multinationals are quietly moving supply chains. Apple is now assembling iPhones in India. Foxconn is expanding in Vietnam. Production is diversifying, just in case if the next shock hits. What began as a tariff fight has become a long-term economic decoupling. The world that once welcomed China as its factory now sees it as a competitor, even a threat. This isn't just trade friction, it's a tech war, a supply chain war, and a test of whether China can thrive in a world that's no longer working for it. China knows the old growth engines are breaking, so it's making a bet, a massive pivot toward high-tech manufacturing and future industries. The strategy is called Made in China 2025. The goal? Dominate 10 critical sectors, from artificial intelligence and semiconductors to electric vehicles, green tech, and aerospace. The idea is simple. Stop relying on foreign technology. Build everything in China. Control the entire supply chain, from raw materials to finished products. And it's working, sort of. China now makes more EVs than any country on Earth. It leads in battery production, solar panel output, and green infrastructure. But there's a problem. These industries are scaling too fast. The result? Overcapacity. More factories than buyers. More EVs than drivers. More solar panels than grids can handle. Even Chinese officials admit the risk. If supply keeps outpacing demand, it could trigger a global price war and blowback from trading partners. So while China is racing to lead the industries of the future, it may be flooding the world faster than it can sell to it. If exports are weakening, and overproduction is dangerous, and there's only one engine left, domestic consumption. Beijing wants Chinese people to spend more, save less, and drive growth from the inside out, like the US or Europe. But that's easier said than done. China's population is aging rapidly. The number of young working adults is shrinking, while retirees are rising. Cultural habits make it worse. Chinese households still save aggressively, not out of greed, but out of fear. Fear of medical bills, unemployment, or uncertain pensions. And then there's the youth. Millions of graduates now face record unemployment. They can't find jobs, or don't trust the ones they get. For decades, young Chinese could fall back on real estate. It wasn't just shelter, it was the default investment, the retirement plan, the dowry. But now, that trust is broken. With jobs uncertain, birth rates falling and housing faith shattered, consumption isn't rising, it's retreating. China wants its people to spend like Americans, but the average Chinese citizen still thinks like a survivor. China's rise wasn't accidental. It was engineered. A hybrid system, centralized political control combined with market tools. The party set the goals. The state controlled the land, banks, and money. And the private sector, under pressure but with profit, delivered speed and scale. It worked. For 30 years, this model lifted 800 million people out of poverty, built world-class infrastructure, and turned China into the world's second-largest economy. But China's growth wasn't powered by consumption. It was powered by exports and construction. It learned how to build high-quality, technologically advanced products, smartphones, laptops, cars, by first assembling them for others. Now, to sustain that advancement, China must stabilize its real estate market, likely through population expansion or reform. It must build a service-based economy to create jobs, and it must boost domestic consumption, so Chinese brands can thrive at home, not just abroad. And on the technological front, China is pushing hard. It's filing AI patents, developing its own AI chips, and even building domestic lithography machines. Just like in EVs, Chinese-made AI chips may soon catch up with the West, not because they're invited to compete, but because they're locked out. But now the pressure is rising from both inside and out. Internally, debt, demographics, youth unemployment, broken real estate trust. Externally, tariffs, chip bans, and a world moving away from dependency. Can a system built for expansion survive in a world of contraction? Will China adapt, shift its model, open up, let go of control? Or is it already nearing a systemic breaking point? What do you think? Can China escape this crisis? Or is the machine already unraveling? Drop your take in the comments and we read everyone. And if you want more breakdowns like this, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. For deeper charts, analysis, data, and research, visit nextorderalpha.com and subscribe for our newsletter, link in the description. We go beyond headlines and into the structure.